We don't want people who are automatically going to understand everything we say. Hey, welcome back to the Church Staff Book Club. My name is Jonathan Malm.
And I'm Jason Young.
We are now on to chapter 3 of the book we're reading called Likable Leader. It is a book that Jason and I wrote. We've talked about this in every episode, probably the book I'm most ashamed of, but probably as I'm rereading it, my favorite book we've written, which is interesting.
People are like, what? Explain,
Yes.
Say more, Jonathan.
Likable Leader, it's just the title, we always struggle, at least for me, I'm like, I never want to be that person who needs to be liked. Realistically, I am that person who needs to be liked, but I'm ashamed of that. And I realized, man, like there's this like easy way to misinterpret the title of the book is like, this is how to be liked. And it's not really what it's about. This book is about how to be a leader that people want to follow, because people want to follow the people they like. And it doesn't necessarily mean being the funniest person or the most charismatic or the most friendly person as a leader. It just means being the person that people want to follow. So this chapter, we're talking specifically about communicating wholly, not holy as in without sin or set apart, I guess is the right use for the word holy, but the idea of communicating without flaws. Obviously, we're flawed people. And we talk about in this book this communication model and how that often is one of the best ways to explain why people misinterpret what we talk about. So what is this chapter about to you, Jason? This one I feel like got into a lot of communication nitty-gritty stuff, but I feel like there's some really practical stuff in this chapter.
Yeah, I think if succinctly said, leaders often focus on delivering a message. And what leaders could focus more on is the ownership of people understanding the message. So not just dumping off words, but thinking more strategically and impactfully what they're saying so it increases understanding. It reminds me of this phrase. And if you're listening, watching right now, have you ever said this? I know I said it. So why don't they get it? How hard is it? You've probably been there as a leader, right? But what if it's not, what if the problem isn't that the other person isn't listening or they don't want to listen? I mean, it could be, but let's just assume it's not. What if the communication is being measured by what people hear and understand based on the very things that I'm saying? Is there a way to say them more thoughtfully, strategically, and impactfully? And we think in this chapter, the answer is yes. And when you do, your likability as a leader, your followership as a leader increases.
Yeah, I feel like what's helped me understand this concept the most is being edited as a writer. I remember my first book, Created for More, was a devotional for creative people, and we launched some initial copies for preview readers. And for some reason, I guess it was built on an old manuscript, and that hadn't been edited by this one copy editor. And this one copy editor, I remember I wrote this part in the book that said it creates this zen for a designer. I use the word zen, and just the idea of this feeling of, for me, I'm not into Buddhism, I'm not into any of that stuff. So for me, I'm just like, what an elating feeling, or whatever. I don't forget what we changed it to, but the editor said, hey, this use of the word zen could be a stumbling block for people. This could get people to miss what you're trying to say. And sure enough, one of the reviews on my book is criticizing my book for Eastern mysticism. Just because I use this one word, I was not getting into Eastern mysticism whatsoever. But so often, little things that we say can cause our message to be taken a way we never intended it. And the communication model helps us understand that yes, one part of it is what we say, but then the other part is what people hear, how they interpret what we say. And then in between all of this is this thing called noise, where noise gets in the way of our message. And we talk about what that means from a more organizational standpoint. We try to put some more legs to this, but that helps me, I think, so understand this concept. I remember my dad, he would edit some of the stuff that I wrote, and he's like, this word right here, you don't need to say this word. Why are you saying that? Or this concept here, this doesn't help your point. It's going to distract people. It's going to get people off. Pastors see this all the time in their message, where they will say one word, especially in today's politically charged climate, that will get people assuming you're saying something that's not remotely what you're saying. And we have to be aware of this whenever we're talking about leading teams.
Yeah, and what you just said, Jonathan, I love. I think sometimes in the world of leadership, we think we have people problems. And I wonder if we have a
Mm.
communication problem. Now,
Yeah.
again, not always, but what if maybe as a leader, when you look out at the people you lead, could be staff, paid staff, could be volunteers, if you're, a business owner, your employees, right? And you're like, these people, man, like, they don't get it. I
Yeah.
told them this, they did the opposite, or, they misunderstood me, or well, they just don't share my vision, Jonathan.
Yeah.
What if it's not a people problem? What if it's a communication problem? And one of the hardest things over the years that I've learned, and I learned it painfully, is realizing that people experience our actions in the moment,
Yeah.
not our intentions. Well, I
Yeah.
didn't mean, or I meant to, and it's okay, but they don't experience our intentions. They experience our actions. And in this particular conversation, they experience our communication. And Jonathan laid out how we kind of built this chapter around these communication parts, right? Again, it's not revolutionary, but it's very simple. It could be revolutionary in your leadership if implemented intentionally.
And the reality is, we don't want people to this is going to be, I have to explain this, but we don't want people who are automatically going to understand everything we say. Meaning,
Fair.
as a business owner, I am fluent in entrepreneurship. That is my language. I speak it. It is second nature to me. I understand entrepreneurship. I understand the instinct of entrepreneurship. So whenever I communicate with my team, I can't communicate in my language. I have to
Mm,
communicate in their language. If they could communicate in my language, they probably shouldn't be on my team because they should probably be starting their own business, right? Like I brought people in to do things that I can't do as an entrepreneur, and so they speak a different language. This person speaks a different language. And part of my job as a leader is to understand their language and to learn how to translate my language into their language, and that's how it should be. We don't think of that a lot of times in ministry because you're the
true.
lead pastor, you're the person who carries the vision, you're thinking the health of the people, whereas you hire then a designer, and the designer, the only thing they care about is like, does this look cool? They're
Yeah.
speaking a completely different language. They're interpreting everything you say through the lens of, does this design look cool? Hey, we need to design for this women's ministry. It needs to be pink. Oh, I hate the color pink. What your designer's thinking? This isn't going to look cool. And you have to realize, like, you either have to help them understand your language or you have to speak their language or help bridge the gap somewhere in between. And that's what this chapter really helps us do, is understand that loop. And so the first part of this chapter, we talk about, and this is something I think we don't do well in churches, is the idea of listening. Uh, in our churches, we are one-way communication largely. At least it has been in the past,
Yeah.
especially in the programming centric part of church, where like we create a service that the church responds to or the church engages in. So we are preaching, we are singing songs, we are encouraging them. It's a one-way communication tool, and we're really good at that. We're so good at the communicating to. We're not so great at the being communicated with. And that is
Yeah.
a vital part. The idea of listening. Are you listening to people? I
Yeah.
mean, what do you, where do you feel like we get it wrong in this idea of like listening whenever it comes to especially church leadership?
Yeah, I love what you said. There's a book Kate Murphy wrote. I think the title is called "Are You Listening?"
Hmm.
In it, what's interesting is if you look at some statistics, it's fascinating. Let me give you a few. There was an organization that did a survey, and they found that only 8% of mid-level leaders are rated by their teams, their staff, as practicing listening very well. So it's
Hmm.
it's interesting. Um, here's another one. 96% of people, including managers, including leaders that we're talking about, believe they are good listeners. But when you look at the other side of it,
Yeah.
the employees report a vastly different reality on the receiving end. Um, Let me give you one last stat. It's very fascinating. Zinger Foltman organization, they said that leaders rated shows that leaders rated as poor listeners rank down in the 15th percentile for organizational trust. So you think listening related to organizational trust, but the top tier listening leaders jump to the 86th percentile. So the
Mm.
secret here is listening. And I'll say this, and I feel like I could say this with pretty good confidence. Most leadership books spend 90%, I'm making up a percentage,
Yeah.
vast majority of their time on speaking, because
Yeah.
leaders do that a lot. Church leaders, we do that a lot. You think about worship, words, music, words,
Hmm.
right? Preaching, words, guiding volunteers, words. But we don't spend a lot of time on the other two. And when we practically think about listening, and in the book, we try to be as practical. That's one thing Jonathan and I really work hard on, is being
Yeah.
practical. What are some ways that you can practically listen with an active approach with people, whether they're staff or volunteers? Here's some ideas that you can do. Assume a posture of curiosity. That translates to ask intelligent questions, thoughtful questions, right?
Yeah.
Authentically asking questions. Remember details. If you have to record those details later, it shows. So when you bring it up later, it shows that you listened, right?
And
Maybe you can
those
make
two kind of work.
connections.
Those work together because you can't
Oh
ask
yeah,
intelligent questions if you didn't remember the thing that they told you that will inform that question.
100%. 100%. Making sure when you're listening that you're not also utilizing some form of technology, because it
Mm.
feels like that's a barrier between the two of you. Maybe it's making connections between what they say, or maybe they've said something and you can connect them with, another person, but that could be helpful to them. Could be listening past just the very response you want to give, right? You've got something to say. You're listening to enough of what they say to respond. And it's like, I'm going to pause long enough to continue listening to what they are saying, repeating back to them what you heard, right? Not saying verbatim, but
Yeah.
it's like, so I want to make sure that I'm picking up what you're laying down. Are you saying X, Y, and Z? Or sometimes what I'll say to people is, I think I'm tracking. Could you say it a different way to make sure that I understand?
Yeah.
Right.
I would say
The other
that that
thing,
repeating back thing is a real skill. I've had to learn this
yes.
with my wife, is that I have to repeat it in a different way. And so that
Mm,
means what that forces me to do though is really try to analyze what she's saying. I mean, you
yeah.
learn this in college whenever you're doing a paper and you're, citing a source. You're not supposed to just quote it. The best thing you can do is paraphrase it, meaning to figure out how to say it in your own words so that you understand it and communicate it for your purposes. So I have to say, "Hey," and sometimes I feel dumb doing this, but I'm like, "I feel like you're saying that you feel frustrated whenever I do this. Is that right?" And she's like, "Yes." Or oftentimes I'm like, "Oh, I missed it." Because again, we're flawed at communicating. She's flawed at
Yeah.
communicating. And so sometimes by me clarifying what I think she's saying, she could say, "No, that's not actually what I meant. I meant more this." And I'm like, "Oh, I understand now."
Yeah. Yeah. And people want to be understood. And the example that you just gave, it's helping someone to feel they are being understood. Maybe the last thing, this is hard because it takes a lot of time, but man, it's powerful. Work really hard at understanding what's happening in their life. So you
Yeah.
care about them beyond work, and you're taking into consideration everything that's happening in and around them, and it shows a demonstration of care. What's fascinating about leadership, and again, I could be wrong, this is just Jason's take it for what it's worth. I think most leaders think they're good listeners simply because they're quiet when someone else is talking, and that
Mm.
doesn't equal listening.
Yeah.
So just because you're quiet when someone else is talking does not mean that you're necessarily listening. It might play a role, but really what we're talking about is, are you listening through their words, what they're not saying, their body language, their emotions, all of that? Are you tracking with them, not just being quiet long enough in order to give them a response? And so I know I said a lot of listening. I was been terrible at listening early on in my own leadership career, and I wanted just to talk over people. I dismissed people. I interrupted people. I still find myself tripping up over these things sometimes. I've gotten better, but it's been a lot of work. And my wife has been really helpful to say at times, you're not a good listener. It's if you want to become a leader that is likable and worth following, if you can work on one skill, and this is true. I would say this. She said this, I would say this. Work on listening.
Yeah.
Because if you can be a leader and give the gift of listening to someone else, that will accelerate your leadership faster than almost any other leadership skill that I could even talk about.
Yeah. I think one of the things, I mean, this is one of the things I see really common in especially volunteer leaders to volunteers is maybe we did listen, but when it comes to the way we work, we don't reflect back on the things that we listen to. I think about
Oh,
Planning
so
Center
good.
is the perfect example of this, where like, you know, hey, I said I was going to be out of town that week,
Mm,
and then you scheduled me on Planning Center. The poor volunteer leader is just he sees a gap, he sees someone who forgot to block off, and then oh, I'll put them there. Or sometimes the system does it automatically. But that single thing of being scheduled whenever someone was told that they were going to be out of
yep.
town shows
Yeah.
you didn't listen to them. You didn't that
Yeah.
thing that they communicated with you. And it's a simple misunderstanding. Like, of course, you're just in the space. Oh, dumb mistake, right? But because all I'm just fulfilling a task. I'm doing the mundane thing. How does that in any way affect listening? So I think about things like that. Or again, sometimes it's a matter of if we don't know how to ask questions or if we don't know how to listen with understanding, sometimes, especially in leadership, our teams will tell us something because they're afraid to maybe say it bluntly. They'll tell us something maybe kind of roundabout to hope that we can make the connections like, hey, oh yeah, sometimes it's kind of hard to get, sometimes it's kind of hard to meet this deadline. And for
Mm,
me, I'm like, okay, cool, figure it out. But they're saying, hey, your deadline is maybe unreasonable. They don't want to say that because that sounds like it's an attack against me. But they say,
yeah.
hey, yeah, it's just hard to meet this deadline. And for me, I'm like, well, then figure it out. Like that's your job. Like do your job,
Mm,
right? But I have to realize, okay, what they're trying to communicate in order to maybe not attack me is that I need some more time here. And so
yeah.
little things like that again. But if I ask the question, so wait, so you're saying it's hard to meet that deadline. Does that mean that you need more time regularly? Does that mean that I'm like putting too much? But by communicating back, by repeating what I hear them saying,
Yeah.
learning that skill is so vital.
It is, and in fact, there's another part in this chapter that we don't spend a lot of time on, but it connects to what you just said, and we've heard this phrase, forever, right? In leadership, it's giving people the benefit of the doubt. So if you're
Yeah.
thinking about, I want to build a healthy followership, remember this: followership depends on relationship.
Hmm.
So relationship is really, really powerful. Well, if that is true, and I think it is, it's
Yeah.
directly connected to trust. And what can destroy trust faster? Man, assuming the worst in people, right? And so
Yeah.
this is something look, true confession. I was not good at this part, what I'm about to say, early on in ministry leadership world. But the older I got, the more I began to understand this, that people are usually doing the best they can with what they're carrying.
Yeah.
And sometimes I used to like, God, why can't Jonathan do blank? Or why
Hmm.
did Jonathan do blank? And so I would kind of rush to judgment versus approaching it without assumption, without labels, without judging intent, right? Things I don't know, and
Yeah.
assuming stepping into that great graciously, like, you know what, Jonathan's probably doing the best he can with what he's carrying. I might not know what he's carrying, but when I approach it from that side, I show up differently. I know there's a leader saying to themselves, yeah, but what about accountability?
Yeah.
Fair. But remember this: being gracious doesn't eliminate accountability. It actually changes how accountability begins.
Yeah.
And so when you show up with this approach versus an assumptive approach, if that's a word, then you get a different result by and large. And so I think there's this aspect of what you're saying of giving people benefit of the doubt, assuming that they're probably doing the best they can with what they're carrying, and approaching it with that, whether it's a staff member, whether it's a volunteer, because that signifies a healthier approach in your leadership as you are building followership.
I think of this. I mean, all of this. I feel like obviously we're not dealing with marriage relationships in leadership, but
Mhm.
I think we're talking about noise. We're talking about the things that get in the way of the communication. talking about being gracious, but I think about marriage is a perfect example of this, where there are seasons in my wife's life where things are stressful. There's more noise happening in
Mm,
her head. She might not understand the things that I'm saying. We might argue a little bit more. And it's so tempting for me to focus on the accountability element where, like, she should figure this out. Like,
mm,
yes, she's experiencing extreme anxiety, but that she should be figuring this out for our marriage. And if I'd approach our marriage that way, I'm not going to have a marriage in 12 months or 2 years.
yeah.
And I'm going to have to start from scratch with someone else or just not have it in the first place. And I think about that with staff members, where if we're not willing to be gracious whenever they're going through the storms of life,
Mm,
we lose everything that we've invested into them up to this point. And we are now going to have to start from scratch with someone else who's also going to have storms in their life eventually.
yeah. Yeah.
And that's what grace allows us to do. Is grace allows us to retain a lot of the work that we've put into training, the trust that we've built, all of this stuff. We don't throw that away, and grace lets us keep that, keep the benefit of that. So while we weather this rough season together, hey, I'm going to pastor you through the season, which we're called to be pastors in the church. I'm going to pastor you
Yeah.
through the season of where I know you're going through storms, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying, you're missing the mark a lot of times, but I know that we're going to get through this, and we're still going to have this deep well of trust that we've built over years to draw from, and we're not going to have to start from scratch with someone else. So I think that's kind of that balance of, like, yes, accountability matters, but at some point we have to decide, is all of this history worth throwing away so that we can keep them accountable?
Yeah. Eh, You know, you talk about like life, and you talked about earlier noise, and I think about a lot of leadership books don't talk about noise. I bet you watching or listening right now, there's probably elements of noise that it's so overwhelming. It's hard. Maybe you would say, God, I hadn't heard from God in a long time, or I don't have time to think. I got so many, noises. It could be the season you're in is so overwhelmingly busy. I think about, fall kickoff for churches, like super busy. People are back, school's starting. A lot of times we kick off small groups, or we do a push for a volunteer invite. We do a variety. We start that new series we've worked so hard on. So the season is busy. Maybe over the summer there's been an organizational change. Maybe you've had to restructure staff. Maybe you had to let a staff person go. Maybe there was an emotional departure from a staff person, or maybe a volunteer, or maybe there was a family or a couple or a person at your church that you were close to, and it's been an emotional departure and it hurt you.
Hmm.
Maybe there's conflict that you're navigating right now from multiple people, staff, or people that attend your church, or people outside the church. But the noise is coming from all around you. And I love the list that we put together. Again, you could Google this. There's probably aspects of this list that sit out there on the internet. But for us, when we think about you watching or listening right now, and that noise plugging you from multiple angles, what could this list help you do when it comes to reducing noise? We hope that it does just that, reduces it so that your load can feel lighter. You can focus on the things that you love. You could build relationships with people.
Yeah.
You can hear the voice of God. You can have that peace that maybe it hasn't felt very peaceful lately. So I don't know. I'd love for us to maybe navigate some ways to reduce that noise. You want to start
Yeah.
us? You want me to start us off? What would be
No,
helpful?
yeah. So we have 6 ways. A lot of it is awareness. So just being aware that the noise
Mm-hmm.
is there in the first place. So understanding the atmosphere that you're in. So, like you said, if you're in a crazy busy season at the church, or if a key volunteer just left and pitched a grenade behind themselves and just destroyed everything, or if there's a lot of conflict happening in the staff or a lot of staff turnover, that is just an atmosphere of noise. There are
Yeah.
assumptions flying. There's gaps in communication where people are having to make assumptions to try to fill in the gaps. Like, okay, something happened I don't understand. Now I have to try to create a narrative in my head to understand that. And so there's just noise happening. People are maybe accusing you of stuff that is not true, or maybe is partially true, right? Like, being aware of the atmosphere of noise and saying, okay, in this season, I have to be incredibly clear in the way that I
Mm.
communicate. both in the things that I don't communicate and the things that I do communicate. Both of those things communicate things.
Yeah.
Um, Being aware of your casual and nonverbal communication. I think this happens a lot in like the pastoral role, where often, yes, you're their boss, but you're also kind of like you're kind of like also in the battle with them. So you're kind of a comrade. And sometimes they're your friends that work for you, and you can say casual things or nonverbal things, or make a face or make a dumb joke that, if you're not aware that they're struggling right now, they're going to misinterpret what you're saying
Mm.
as, so I think about like I think about, like, okay, we're gonna have to fire someone, and we had to fire them, and like, so now the person who's left is friends with me, but that person was also friends with that person. You can be like, yeah, man, good thing we let them go. Like, you can say something dumb that's just like, it's just like it's nothing you believe. It's just something you feel awkward. So you're almost like self-deprecating a little bit. But now that person that you communicated that stayed, who was also friends with that person, says, oh, that doesn't feel good. Am I
Mm.
expendable like that person? And it's just
Mm.
little things like that where, like, yes, even though you're their friend, there's still hurt that happens. There's an open wound, and little things that we can say communicate a lot. Do you want to take over the next kind of three or four?
Yeah, we mentioned one earlier, just knowing what's happening in the lives of people around you. That takes
Yeah.
time, intentionality, being strategic with your time, being available, accessible, listening, walking around, the office or walking around your volunteer room, noticing things, super, super important. Remember, notice things, see people. Notice things,
Mm.
see people. This one kind of is a little humorous, but like communicate until you're annoyed. Not
Yeah.
till they're annoyed, but till you're annoyed. You're like, they don't need to hear this again. I'm just not going to say it. Just assume they probably do. And that goes, back to what we said earlier, like being clear. So just in essence, you feel like, God, I feel like I'm over communicating. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So,
My brother worked at an airport, and he
yeah.
told us, he's like, every time you make an announcement over the PA, you have to make it three times in three different ways, because the first one gets their attention, the second one makes them say, wait, was that announcement for me? And then the third time is like, oh, that one announcement. So he said, like, flight 53 has changed to gate 10. Hey, if you're
Yeah.
going to Tampa on flight 53, your new gate is going to be gate 10. By the way,
Yeah.
the new gate for flight 53 is gate 10. You say it three times, and he's like, that's the
Yeah.
way that you get people to actually hear it. Otherwise, everyone's going to be coming up to you saying, what did you just say?
Yeah. No, that's a good word. The last two, really, I know leadership is hard. Um, And this part is super, super important because you want people to do this for you. Believe the
Hmm.
best about
Yeah.
people. I mean, you want that. You want people to do that to you. And you're like, yeah, but a lot of people don't. Well, just because you don't feel a lot of people doing that to you as the leader doesn't mean that you should withhold that from somebody else.
Here's what I tell my 5-year-old is, just because other people aren't doing the right thing doesn't mean you shouldn't. I'm
Yeah.
teaching him the golden rule. I'm saying, you proactively do for others what you want for them to do to you. You don't do back to
Yeah.
others what they did to you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. Take us to the last one.
Yeah, and then the last one is slow down, and I love, we have this illustration in the book where you're talking about how you're teaching your teenage son how to drive, and like every time he steps on the brake, you dramatically like slam your head against the
Yeah.
dashboard, or you're like, "Whoa," like, and the idea is like, for a passenger who's not in control of the car, it can feel a lot more extreme, all of those movements.
Yeah.
That turn, that speeding up, that slowing down, it feels extreme whenever you're not in control. And we have to remember, for our team members, they're not the ones in control of the pace. We are. And
Mm.
sometimes we just, as we're leading people, we slow down a little bit. We're aware that,
Yeah.
like, hey, they feel out of control right now. So I'm going to, this new thing that I'm excited about, I'm just going to go a little bit slower into it, even though it's frustrating to me, but because I'm going to try to bring them along in this new initiative, or letting this
Yeah.
person go, or sunsetting this ministry, or whatever it is, these big changes. We just slow down a little bit because we realize that we're bringing people along. We're trying to make sure they understand what's happening, they communicate. So, anything before we
Yeah.
close?
I would just say this on what you just said. For some of you listening, watching right now, you're a driver, get it done, 90 miles an hour. People can
Yeah.
just catch up. They need to
Yeah.
keep up with me, all that. I would say this. We're not saying you got to stay in the slow mode forever.
Yeah.
But I will say that slow leaders, when they understand the throttle, that's why there's a variety of speed limits when we drive a car, right? In
Yeah.
certain areas, it requires a different speed limit. In certain times of leadership, it requires a different speed limit. And so I have seen this over and over and over again. I did never used to think about this, but slow leaders can actually calm an anxious team.
Hmm.
So if you feel that the team is anxious about something, slow down and realize that in that effort, you are actually bringing a calm, I almost think like a balm, if you
Yeah.
will, to an anxious team that can be therapeutic in what that team needs in that particular season.
That's solid. Hey, we hope this was helpful. Whether or not you're reading along with us or just tuning in, our goal is that you get something good from this podcast. So make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already. Find us on social media, but we will see you next week for chapter 4.